Today's episode of Pioneers in Culture features Mike Tan, co-CEO and co-founder of RetreatsAndVenues. Mike brings an operational lens to retreats. He's worked closely with leadership teams planning offsites and has seen where trust breaks down, where costs compound, and where execution quietly fails. In this conversation, we're unpacking what was broken in retreat planning before retreats and venues existed, what truly defines a five-star retreat, and why connection only works when the foundation underneath it is solid. Mike, thanks for joining us today. Before we talk about retreats and venues, I want to go back to what you were seeing on the ground. Before retreats and venues existed, what did planning a retreat actually look like behind the scenes?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me here, Dana. What did retreat planning actually look like back in the day? Back in the day, I was often hearing about a really cool retreat venue from another CEO or another friend. Really, there was no marketplace or directory where you could find really great venues. And so it was often hearsay. I remember even for one of our very first retreats for Team Pages in Whistler, I had found a venue off of Craigslist. And at the time we were kind of bootstrapped, and I actually built their website for their venue in exchange so we could stay there for free. And so we were finding venues off of Craigslist. We were finding venues from referrals from other CEOs, part of my mastermind group. And often what would happen is we'd all go back to the exact same venues over and over again. And often some of those venues just weren't a really good fit for a retreat, but you would make it work. And so that was kind of the experience back in the day. And that was maybe 10, 15 years ago. Now it's just so much better in that you can kind of scour thousands and thousands of venues all in advance from the comfort of your home. Ideally, see photos and videos and testimonials of those venues and have a better idea of what you're going to get and a much greater selection. And so it's a lot easier to plan and book an amazing retreat experience these days.
I think what's really interesting about what you say is how you talk about it is very different from how retreats are actually talked about. And so I'd love to follow up with just when people hear company retreats, what do you think they fundamentally, misunderstand about what's involved? Because I'm hearing, you guys were scouring Craigslist, it was word of mouth, it's like now we're kind of coming into today. What do people fundamentally misunderstand about what's involved when it comes to planning retreats?
That's a good question. There's just a lot of logistics when it comes to planning a great retreat. From one, picking the right venue to picking the right agenda and flow, how spacious you want that agenda to be. And maybe the first step before that is what is the actual intentions behind the retreat? Are you looking to rally the team around sort of quarterly goals or annual goals, or is it to gain clarity? Or is it more so a product planning session where you want to be creative? Or is it just to bring the team together and to work on culture? Or is it a foundational retreat where you're trying to get clear on your vision, mission, big, hairy, audacious goal, etc.? And once you get clear on the intentions, then it's about crafting the agenda and finding the right space that might mirror those intentions. For instance, if you want a really creative space, like I know IDEO does a great job of creating a really creative space for brainstorming, where they have Nerf guns, lots of whiteboards, a lot of things that kind of spark creativity. Or you may want to get the team really focused on planning and you want to remove distractions. And so you want a space where it's just you and your team, no outside guests. You don't want any distractions kind of interrupting the flow, etc. Or maybe you want to do some team building and you want a great venue where there's a lot of amazing activities on site. And then just understanding what activities your team really enjoy, and not just one person, and making sure those are on site. And then it's figuring out the logistics of getting to the venue, whether that's flying or carpooling, and then arranging the ground transportation. And then what's that welcome experience when someone arrives at the retreat? Is there a really nice thank you letter and gift that kind of encapsulates the overall theme of the retreat? What are those very first interactions at that welcome desk or that welcome experience? And it's all the little details that really add up to an amazing retreat experience and send in the right container. And at the end of the day, it's also super rewarding to see sort of team members come together, lit up, and sort of the energy that carries forward after an amazing retreat experience.
Definitely. I think what I hear from a lot of retreat leaders is just the intention behind the retreat. That kind of is step one. And then from there, the logistics and everything that goes into it kind of follows. But at first, you need to know, what is the purpose of our retreat? Is it a sales kickoff? Are we celebrating something? Is it an exec retreat and we all need to gather around this one problem? Are we creating alignment? And so, my next question for you is, from your perspective, what made retreat planning such a high risk decision for founders and operators that inspired you to kind of create retreats and venues?
Ooh, good question. I think it always, as like a founder, you're always thinking about ROI, right? You're always
Hmm.
thinking about, is this a good use of our money? Is this a good use of our time? And sometimes when you're planning a retreat for the very first time, you're uncertain as to what the ROI might be or how you're
Hmm.
going to execute to achieve the results you want. And I think our focus here at Retreats and Venues is to tap into the collective wisdom of all these other founders, retreat leaders, venues, et cetera, and surface the best practices, the best insights, and to make it more predictable and likely that we have these great ROI outcomes where our
Hmm.
teams come back, as our co-founder Corey says, more aligned, connected, and energized. And really, just like building a great company, it's about following the right SOPs and right playbooks. And our job
Hmm.
here at Retreats and Venues is to identify those SOPs, those playbooks, and to share that with the broader community. And then also to make it easier to find those great venues that are a great fit. Often what my belief is that a venue is about 75 to 80% of the overall experience of retreat. If you pick the right
Hmm.
location, a lot gets taken care of. And so our job here is to make sure that we're constantly curating and finding out about the best retreat venues around the world,
Hmm.
surfacing all the information you need to make sure whether or not it's the right fit for you and your team or your event. And then to bring trust into the space to collect ratings, reviews, and to make it a seamless and easy experience to find and book those amazing venues.
And I think ROI is oftentimes, it's more than just a buzzword, but it's something that comes up a lot in these conversations. And one question I have for you is how to measure ROI. From other leaders in the retreat space, I've heard that, they do feedback forms and they see, good retention and company culture. So for you, in the retreat planning space, what's one way that you can measure ROI?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it really goes back to the intentions of your retreat, right? I
Mhm.
think it is a good best practice to constantly solicit feedback and to do post surveys for anything, whether that's a retreat or a quarter or whatnot. It's always good to get feedback. But I think
Mhm.
first thing is to take a step back and ask yourself, what is the intention of my retreat? Is it to bring my team members closer together and to create a sense of cohesiveness? Well, then that's what I would measure at the end of the retreat. And I would also
Mhm.
measure that 6 months post, just because there's always a warm, fuzzy feeling after a retreat, and your data might be a bit skewed. And the question then is, how long does that last?
Mhm.
Or is it around aligning a team around sort of sales goals and the ROI you're looking for is hitting those targets and having the team super energized? Then the
Mhm.
question is, one, are they clear on the goal after the retreat? And then two, taking a look at the end of the quarter, did we hit it? And so really goes back to what are the intentions and creating I guess you could say, a bespoke survey as to whether or not those objectives were achieved. Um, if anyone has any questions, we can obviously help with that, and we have templates and whatnot
Yeah,
we can share.
definitely. And I think across, when you're looking at the hundreds of retreats, there's patterns that start to show up. Before, retreats and venues, you're talking about looking at Craigslist and sourcing venues and things like that. But can you kind of pinpoint where you were seeing consistent failure kind of before a better system was in place? Before retreats and venues came into place, what were the consistent like points that you saw where you're just like, oh, there has to be a better way to do this?
Yeah, I think without something like retreats and venues, what we found was a lot of teams would go to hotels within their city or
Mm,
kind of nearby, and they would only book out a portion of the rooms. And what would happen is you get a mixed sense of energy in those retreats where there's distractions of other guests. Maybe the
mm,
guests beside you are partying, or your team members get distracted by other people. And what we found with retreats and venues is by surfacing these amazing venues, you can actually pick the right venue that is appropriate for your size of team and
mhm,
actually get a full buyout and actually have full control over the container of the space and remove all the distractions. And you could also find venues that aligned with the activities that you and your team really want to do. And now what we see are teams going all around the world exploring these amazing destinations and these amazing, beautiful venues around the world. And what we're seeing is that teams are not only using retreats as a tool to kind of align their teams, but also for
mhm,
retention. And what happens, we often hear, is that team members stick around. Team members that might have been disenfranchised stick around for the next retreat. They go on the retreat and all of a sudden they're re-energized, realigned to the mission, and they continue to stay on, contributing to that mission. And so those are some of the changes that we've seen over the years.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really powerful, especially, from the topic of retention is you can kind of go into a company retreat, maybe feeling a little bit off, but then just coming back and, like you said, like Corey likes to say, aligned, connected, and engaged. And my question for you then is how do retreats help build company culture? Culture, that's something that's always like ongoing and something that people leaders are always striving to build. So as, co-CEO, how do you aspire to kind of build culture with retreats and venues?
Yeah, I think we work with a lot of remote and hybrid companies. And I think culture is one of those things that not only do you read about, but you got to feel.
Mhm.
And meeting in person is one of the best ways to actually feel and see the culture being lived by the executive team, by the founders, by leadership, et cetera. And it's one of those things you see in those micro moments of how a leader or a team treats the server, how polite they are, how grateful they are. It's those side conversations that happen within a retreat that show that they care, or where you talk about if part of it is about creating delightful and exceptional experiences. Does the founding team talk to you about those things? I think that's the thing about a retreat is it gives a possibility of immersion of
Mm.
culture. I remember doing exchanges back in university and high school where I learned French. And one of the best ways to learn a language or to learn any skill, comes from Tim Ferriss, is to immerse yourself in that intensely. And I think that's one of the things that a retreat does is it gives that immersion and that intensity where everyone can really feel it and carry that forward. And then what we find is really healthy teams tend to do this in a regular beat frequency, whether that's annually or quarterly, or sometimes they meet monthly with their departments to continue to re-inject that culture and that feeling of culture back into their teams.
Yeah, I think meeting in person, there's just nothing quite like it, even in a remote or hybrid, kind of first company. That's something that we hear all the time on the podcast is just, oh, I see you every day on Zoom, but you're taller than I expected. Or, there's just nothing quite like that first in person moment and getting to meet each other. And I think, when it comes to retreats, you've seen and experienced many yourself. And I think it kind of forces you to think, what makes a retreat good and what makes it bad. And so my question for you is you use the phrase 5-star retreat a lot, but not in a traditional sense. I don't think, you use it as like we're going to a 5-star hotel or a five-star resort. So I would love for you, can you define what is a 5-star retreat?
Yeah, 5-star retreat is what you could say an exceptional experience, magical experience, some could say, where team members feel like they experienced something really special, where, as Corey mentions, they feel more aligned to the company, but also to
Mhm.
themselves, more connected with themselves and their team members. There's a sense of clarity when they look back at their year. That retreat was one of the highlights of their year. One of the beautiful things about our space is often we work with these remote and hybrid companies, as we mentioned, and they have team members from all around the globe. And sometimes this is the very first experience where they get to travel outside of their country. I think actually going back to what makes it a 5-star retreat, it's nailing the intention and just where everyone who participated is connected to that intention and that objective, where you weave a sense of connection between the participants, where they feel closer and more bonded together, and they've had these shared moments. And it doesn't need to be at a 5-star resort. Sometimes
Mhm.
some of the best retreats that we put on, we did Camp Good Times, and that was at a kids camp where we're all sleeping in bunk beds and we had to bring sleeping bags and whatnot. But we had an amazing experience where the camp counselors led us through these different camp games and treated us like kids. And we had wood burning saunas brought in, and we would do cold
Wow.
plunges, and we had campfire songs. And it's just about, I think, the space and the energy and the container that you build. And I think part of it is creating a sense of belonging and a safe space
Mhm.
for people to bring out their authentic selves and to share openly. So those are some of the things related to 5-star experience. And I think at the end of the day, you can just run a survey, and on a scale of 0 to 5, how would you rate the quality of the experience? And maybe that's the shortcut to that answer.
No, I think all the little like emotions that we feel throughout a retreat or an experience, I think that does definitely add on to, what makes it 5 star. It's kind of at the end of the day, we're left with how I felt emotionally. A lot of
Hmm.
times that's the big takeaway is like, wow, I was at this venue and maybe like the barista there was really cool and like, made you a nice cup of coffee and you had a great conversation. I think those are like the lasting little moments that you take home with you post retreat that definitely help define, what does it mean to host and have a 5 star retreat.
Yeah.
And I think, we talk about, being in the moment and finally meeting each other. But how much of a retreat success is actually determined before anyone has even shown up yet?
Interesting.
There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes operationally that maybe, people aren't aware of. Maybe they're not on the people team or they're not in charge of the event. And so my question is just logistic wise and operational wise, before people actually show up, how much of the retreat success is determined before then? So, we've talked about setting the intention that happens before people show up. Maybe it's like budget, things like that. Maybe if you had to give a percentage, what would you say? Like 50%, 75, most of it is determined before anyone shows up. How would you rate
Yeah,
that?
yeah, that's a great question. Okay, I get it. So yeah, I would say it's about like 75, 80%
Wow.
um, of the success of retreat happens before the retreat. Obviously, with any event, things come up during the event. And so that's why you can't say it's 100% because there's things that are going to come up that you're going to have to solve for. And it's also about sort of the presence of leadership and the facilitators, whoever's organizing the event and how they show up at the event really
Hmm.
matters as well. But a big part of it is figuring out all the logistics, all the agendas in advance. It's a lot around communication to participants as to what to expect, what to bring, make sure they're really well prepped, and to hire the right facilitators and for the sessions and make sure they're really well prepped. Every single event should be punchy.
Hmm.
It should be well thought through and that's what makes a great event. And then it's preempting potential issues that might come up and
Hmm.
having sometimes backup plans. What if this scenario happens? What are we going to do? And that allows you to help have things run smoothly.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think whenever you zoom out, this isn't just about like one retreat going well. You've talked about being on a mission to deliver 5 star or a billion 5 star retreats. And my question for you is why does that level of scale matter?
Yeah, I think when we were first starting off retreats and venues, one of the things that came up for us was like what makes a really great life. And the common thing for us is really the experiences we have. And when we look back at like when we're 80, 90, maybe 150 years old one day, and we look back at our lives and look back at the quality of our lives, it's those bright spots, those magical moments, those
Mm.
shared experiences that really stand out. And we feel very privileged to be a part of a industry and to work on a company that really helps bring those experiences to life, where we bring people together to connect.
Mhm.
And we talk about like part of our mission is really scaling human connection. And retreats are one of the best ways, both corporate and sort of health and wellness and personal development retreats is one of the
Mhm.
best ways to really scale that human connection. Where I think the opportunity retreats have is to bring people outside of their day to day world into a new space where they are a bit more creative in these beautiful places around the world that are inspiring. And what happens at a retreat is people tend to be closer to their best selves because they're
Mhm.
outside of the day to day stress. They're in these beautiful places, eating great food, taken care of, surrounded by great people. I think our goal is just to help more people experience that and for us to experience that along the way as well. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And I think, when founders or, C-suite executives are kind of deciding whether or not to invest in company retreats, what do you think they're underestimating? Is it the value? Are they underestimating maybe the team culture? What do you think kind of like holds them back from deciding to go all in and invest in a company retreat?
I think sometimes founders, especially new founders, haven't experienced a retreat quite yet. And so I think those founders that have experienced a retreat and a really well done retreat instantly get it. They can feel how they feel more energized. There's
Mhm.
clarity. There's a greater sense of team and purpose, and you can just feel the ROI. But not only that, you kind of see it the next quarter after.
Mhm.
There's been studies about the impact of retreats on retention and engagement. And typically what happens is 6 months following a retreat, there's a high level engagement. There's faster response times on Slack. Team members are helping each other a lot more. And the importance is to keep that going. So I think that's part of it is never experiencing it. Part of it's kind of unsure of how to run a really good retreat. Just because in business school or in your different entrepreneurial courses or masterminds, you're not taught how to run a really great retreat. And I think that's our job, is to surface the best practices of organizations like Chase at Doist. He runs amazing retreats and has some really cool, innovative ideas like running a hackathon at a retreat. And I think the more we can kind of share those activities, those agendas that work, I think that will kind of inspire and encourage more founders to take the leap and the chance on running a great retreat.
Yeah, definitely. I know you always like to say like leaning into the collective wisdom, but I definitely think in this retreat space, always knowing different activities to kind of come up with is always fun. A hackathon at a retreat, I haven't heard of that. I've seen those at conferences, but never at a retreat. And I think that's something I'm sure the devs love to do. My next question for you is, when retreats are done well consistently, what actually changes in how teams work together afterward?
I think it goes back to that sense of engagement. You can kind of see it for remote and hybrid companies. Slack messages and response times start to take off, better collaboration across departments. What we see is departments starting to talk more with each other and doing joint collaboration projects because they know what each department's now doing. I think you see a greater sense of morale, and you can kind of just feel it in sort of the language that's being used within the organization. You see some team members tend to work overtime potentially to deliver a project that they're now inspired to do. And so there's a little bit more self-initiation and initiative and motivation. And you start to see these projects that come up from the team. So rather than it being top down, all of a sudden there's this bottom up energy where team members are now surfacing great new ideas and taking that initiative and running with it. And which is always inspiring and great for a founder or an exec to see.
Definitely. Just that kind of renewed sense of belonging and kind of pushing towards the common goal, I think is awesome. So I just have one last question for you.
Yeah.
If you could give one piece of advice to another CEO or fellow co-founder about building culture in a remote environment, what would it be?
When I think about the other startups I've built over the years, there's been a lot of great successes along the way. And when I look back, I think about some of the product launches and I think about some of the things we achieved and the milestones, but also the moments that really stand out to me are those retreats where we brought our team together and we made business a little bit more human. Life's too short to just kind of focus only on the numbers, especially in an age where we're more connected digitally, but less connected, kind of, I could say, from a relationship standpoint. And I think as a founder, looking back at what our careers and what we've done, hopefully we also built organizations that not only helped us thrive kind of financially and stakeholders thrive financially and creates a great impact in the broader world for our customers or those we serve, but we also built a great work environment and great team and a great work experience that we love. And we hope that our kids, if they were in our companies, we'd hope that it's a great experience for them. And I think retreats are a great vehicle and a great tool to elevate that overall experience where our team members do feel more aligned and connected to the broader mission, to one another, and it creates a greater sense of meaning. So yeah, advice would be run retreats or department offsites or get together in person at least and have some fun and do some team building activities together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Mike. That is all I have for you today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Dana.
This episode was brought to you by Retreats and Venues. When your team is spread across the world, your offsite matters more than ever. We make it seamless. Take our quiz today to get started.